Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Have you ever truly stopped to consider the single most fundamental human activity? It's not our grandest inventions or, our deepest philosophical debates. It's something far more primal, eating. Every one of us needs food, follows a diet, has a cuisine, and operates within some kind of system to acquire it. It is, well, quite simply, central to every society on Earth.
Precisely. And the way we acquire, prepare, and consume food doesn't just fill our stomachs. It profoundly shapes our cultures, our health, even the very landscapes we inhabit. Today, we're taking a deep dive into food and subsistence, really extracting key insights from a foundational chapter in human societies. A brief introduction.
Right. Our mission is to quickly unpack the core concepts. So from the basics of how food fuels us to the incredibly diverse ways humans have fed themselves throughout history, right up to the complex challenges of, say, modern industrial agriculture. You'll discover how these systems truly define who we are, where we live, and what we collectively value. Let's get started. So, at its heart, food is about sustenance, the raw material our bodies need to survive. But what truly makes it tick, beyond just feeling full?
Well, that brings us directly to nutrition, which isn't just about quantity, but the quality of what sustains us. Food itself is simply what we consume to meet those nutritional needs, primarily from plants and animals. But nutrition measures food's ability to actually maintain the body, and our requirements aren't static. They shift with illness, pregnancy, or even the seasons. It's also worth noting, while we have recommended daily allowance figures for contemporary Western populations, we really can't assume these apply universally, to all groups across history or the globe.
Okay, and what are those crucial building blocks food provides?
Well, food supplies energy and nutrients, primarily carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Carbs, mostly from plants, convert to sugar for immediate energy, or they get stored as fat. If those aren't available, the body actually resorts to breaking down protein for energy, which, well, that can lead to serious health issues.
And protein is essential for growth, isn't it?
Absolutely. Protein provides amino acids, the fundamental building blocks for all growth and maintenance. Your body breaks down consumed protein and then reassembles it into new proteins. While both plants and animals contain protein, animal products like eggs, milk, blood, meat, they offer a more complete set of essential amino acids. Which is why, a strictly plant-based diet without modern supplements requires pretty careful planning.
Right, right. And we often measure this fuel in calories.
That's right. Calories are a common measure of food energy. While a standard recommendation for many today is around 2,000 calories daily, this varies wildly. I mean, imagine the Inuit in cold climates. They might need as many as 7,000 calories a day just to thrive.
Wow. So from these fundamental needs, how do societies then shape their eating patterns into what we call a diet?
A diet is basically just the combination of foods eaten to supply nutrition. No single food provides everything, right? So societies develop these sophisticated rules and guidelines to ensure varied, nutrient-rich, adequate, and safe diets. What's fascinating here is that traditional societies, without scientific charts, they often instinctively understood dietary balance and its consequences far better than many modern Western diets, which often rely heavily on processed foods and supplements.
And it's a stark reminder that perfect health isn't a given.
Indeed. Throughout history, and even today in many places, people live in a state of constant malnourishment, at least by Western standards. While they might be undersized or less productive, their populations are, well, healthy enough to survive and reproduce. This really challenges our modern assumption that optimal health is the universal norm.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's also incredible how many edible foods exist in the environment, yet no society eats everything. What drives these choices?
Well, cultural classifications, availability, even aesthetics play an enormous role. We often overlook good, nutritious crops for more popular ones, and in desperate times, people might consume foods they'd normally avoid. There's a classic ethnographic example where locals refused peanut butter because its unfamiliar appearance was, well, culturally off-putting. Looked like poop, apparently.
Wow. Okay. This cultural variation even extends to foods many of us might find surprising, like entomophagy, the eating of insects.
It's true. Entomophagy is common in many societies. Think about grasshoppers, beetle larvae, crickets. They're abundant and can be incredibly protein-rich, sometimes as much as 77% protein by weight. Imagine a bustling rural market stall in many countries, like the one shown in Figure 9.1 in the text, just overflowing with various kinds of insects for sale, easily gathered and processed.
That's a powerful image, especially when you consider how Western societies usually treat insects, pests, right?
Exactly. We typically classify them as pests and use poisons, which often, ironically, end up in our processed foods anyway. In contrast, other cultures see them as a valuable food source. There's a really sobering example from Eastern Africa during a drought. Western experts convinced locals to use pesticides during a grasshopper outbreak, which led to famine because neither the poisoned grasshoppers nor the contaminated grain could be eaten. It was truly disastrous advice, just terrible.
So what's the broader lesson here about insects then? Are they just food for some?
Well, they're more integrated into our food systems than we might think, even indirectly. In China, for instance, ducks are rented to wade through rice paddies, eating insects. This efficiently controls pests and fattens the ducks for food, all without pesticides. Pretty smart. Insects also have economic value as animal feed, freeing up grains for human consumption, or their waste, called frass, is harvested as fertilizer. Even ladybugs serve as natural pest control. They are a surprisingly vital part of many ecosystems and food webs.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Food has profoundly shaped human culture and development since, well, the dawn of time. How did our early ancestors evolve their diets?
Initially, early humans gathered and ate a limited selection of plants and animals, primarily those that could be consumed raw. Then came fire, at least 300,000 years ago, and that was an absolute game changer. Suddenly, foods previously inedible could be cooked.
And this wasn't just about making food taste better, was it? There was more to it.
Not at all. This is the essence of the cooking hypothesis. It suggests that the apparent increase in nutrition available from cooked foods correlated with an increase in brain size and cultural complexity. It may well have been a primary impetus for early human development itself, really fundamental.
As humans spread globally, diets diversified, leading to regional specialties. But then, a truly massive shift occurred: agriculture.
Right. The development of agriculture meant focusing on a limited number of species. Now, while this often narrowed the diet for individual farmers, it led to a marked increase in food quantities and an emphasis on specific staple foods. This sometimes, well, mundane diet even spurred the global spice trade. Archaeologists have found evidence of it in Eastern Asia dating back at least 3,000 years. People wanted flavor.
And this quest for flavor, especially from the 1500s onwards, profoundly reshaped the world, didn't it?
It absolutely did. European involvement in the spice trade to flavor their, frankly, often bland fare partly fueled European colonization, making those powers incredibly wealthy. This era also brought about a monumental exchange of people, plants, animals, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds, an event we now call the Columbian Exchange, which is detailed in Spotlight 9.2 in the text.
Okay, so what were some of the most impactful exchanges in this Columbian exchange?
Well, Europe introduced horses, wheat, and sugar plants, which were originally from Southeast Asia, actually to the New World, alongside tragically devastating diseases. Sugar thrived in the Caribbean, becoming such a crucial crop that its intense labor requirements, unfortunately, initiated the slave trade from Africa, a terrible consequence.
But the New World also gave Europe some incredible gifts, things we take for granted now.
Absolutely. Europeans brought back corn or maize tomatoes, chocolate, and potatoes. Corn, first domesticated in Mexico around 7,000 years ago, was a staple for millions of Native Americans. And now, it contributes roughly 30% of all food calories in the U.S. We see it everywhere. Sweet corn, flour, oil, syrup, and as feed for animals.
Tomatoes and chocolate also rapidly gained popularity. Hard to imagine Italian food without tomatoes.
Exactly. Tomatoes became fundamental to Italian cuisine, and chocolate, once a delicacy and even a form of currency in the New World, remains a global favorite.
And then there are potatoes. Their story is particularly powerful and, well, in some ways quite tragic.
It really is. Potatoes, domesticated in South America about 7,000 years ago, became a staple food in much of northeastern Europe. People became highly dependent on just a single variety. Then came the Irish potato famine between 1845 and 1852. It was caused by a disease that just destroyed the crop. It killed millions and forced about 2.5 million Irish to emigrate to the U.S. It's a tragic, powerful lesson on the dangers of dependency and the lack of diversity in diet. Even today, most Westerners still only eat a few of the thousands of potato varieties that exist.
The sources also mention tobacco in the context of the Columbian exchange.
Yes. While Native Americans used several species of tobacco, the genus Nicotiana, for ceremonial and some recreational purposes, Europeans quickly adopted a milder species, N. tabacum. Tobacco farming spread globally, became a massive export, and today, with China as the largest grower and consumer, tobacco has contributed to hundreds of millions of deaths worldwide from related diseases. This raises a really important question for us, doesn't it? How do we weigh the economic impact and, cultural significance of a crop against its long-term societal cost?
A tough one. Definitely something to think about. Now, what's fascinating is that food isn't just sustenance. It's so deeply intertwined with identity.
It really is. Each society develops its own cuisine. That's a unique combination of food items prepared in specific ways, and it's integral to its cultural identity. I mean, while rice is a global staple, its particular type, how it's prepared, the ingredients that go with it, that defines vastly distinct cuisines, right? From Japanese sushi to Indian biryani.
And these cuisines evolve when they travel, don't they? They adapt.
Absolutely. Think about Chinese food in the US. It often features far more fried dishes than you might find in China, reflecting American preferences, maybe. Even the fortune cookie, a ubiquitous part of Chinese American dining, invented right here in the US. The sheer variety of ethnic restaurants you see in any town just proves how central cuisine is to cultural expression and adaptation.
Our sources highlight a truly great diet from ancient Mesoamerica, the Three Sisters.
Yes. The combination of corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters, formed an incredibly nutritious diet. It provided almost all needed nutrients with just a few amino acids missing. Add a piece of chicken or fish, and you've basically got a nearly perfect meal. It's a testament to some serious ingenuity.
Now let's broaden our view a bit. How do societies organize getting all this food and other resources? This is what our sources call a subsistence system.
Right. A subsistence system is how a society gets its food and other important resources. It's deeply integrated into its economic system, and it encompasses far more than just food. It includes social organization, settlement patterns, technology, and the vast knowledge required to make it all work. It's a complex, interconnected system, even in the smallest societies.
Can you give us a quick sense of how social organization fits in?
Certainly. Some subsistence activities require specific forms of social organization. A communal hunt, for instance. Well, it demands a leader, people to drive and kill animals, others to process carcasses, and clear procedures to share the catch, maybe even a religious specialist involved sometimes. Or, individual farmers might form cooperatives for efficient harvest and distribution. It varies.
And where people live, their settlement system is directly tied to this, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The settlement system is fundamentally organized to serve the subsistence system. Residences are located near farms, hunters live near their hunting grounds, everyone needs to be close to water sources, all connected.
Technology, too, plays a crucial role. Tools.
Very much so. Tools are essential for almost everything humans do, right? So obtaining materials for and maintaining tools is critical. A settlement pattern will always include access to raw materials and the technology to process them, whether that's flint knapping or smelting ore into metals.
Finally, knowledge seems paramount. You mentioned that.
It absolutely is. A vast amount of knowledge is needed for any subsistence system to function effectively. In smaller societies, individuals might possess pretty much all the necessary knowledge, while larger, more complex societies require specialists. Anthropologists generally categorize this diversity into four major systems, which Table 9.1 in the text summarizes quite nicely.
So if you imagine Table 9.1, it sort of lays these four types out, right? Hunting and gathering, emphasizing wild plants and animals, generally mobile and small scale. Then horticulture, focusing on domesticated plants and small animals, using only human labor. Then pastoralism, centering on domesticated large animals, maybe some plants, often mobile. And finally, intensive agriculture, using domesticated plants and animals on a large scale, usually with labor supplements like animals or machines.
Exactly. That's a good overview of the four main categories we'll discuss.
Okay, let's dive into these four systems, starting with the earliest, hunting and gathering.
Right. Hunting and gathering societies make their primary living from obtaining wild foods. Until agriculture arrived about 10,000 years ago, all humans were hunter-gatherers. What's often surprising, though, is that for most of these groups, the majority of food, maybe around 80%, actually came from women gathering plants, not men hunting. Though there are exceptions, like the Inuit who rely heavily on hunting, some hunter-gatherers even do a bit of small-scale farming on the side.
What stands out about their lifestyles? Are they all the same?
Oh, not at all. They exhibit a vast range of structures and adaptations. Many are egalitarian, with relatively simple divisions of labor, and often viewed as peaceful. They typically have small, mobile populations, people we call foragers, who move seasonally to obtain resources, following what's called a seasonal round. However, some groups, like certain tribes or chiefdoms that relied on hunting and gathering, were larger and more complex. So there's variation.
And their diets were incredibly diverse, as Spotlight 9.3 highlights.
Indeed, they often ate hundreds of species of plants and animals. Plants were definite staples. Seeds gathered in specialized baskets, processed on grinding stones into flour or parched for storage. Roots dug with digging sticks, some even sort of semi-domesticated like early potatoes perhaps, berries, and nuts like pine nuts and acorns. Acorns are especially interesting because they contain tannic acid, a toxin. They required this really time-consuming leaching process before they could actually be eaten safely.
Wow, what kind of animals did they hunt? Things we might not think of.
Definitely. Many species not commonly eaten in Western societies today. Everything from elephants in African rainforests and whales in the Arctic to ancient mammoths, rhinos, and even bison on the Great Plains. Speaking of bison, it's a sobering point that the U.S. government virtually drove them to extinction by 1900, largely to deprive native people of their livelihood. A stark reminder of historical impacts. They also ate smaller animals like rodents, reptiles, amphibians, and, yes, various insects too.
So even with modern agriculture dominating today, do we still engage in hunting and gathering at all?
Absolutely. All societies, including Western ones, still incorporate some hunting and gathering. Think about hunting and fishing as hobbies, or military survival training, or even just buying wild foods like wild-caught salmon or berries at the grocery store. It's a fundamental human activity that never entirely disappeared.
Okay, let's transition now to the massive shift from wild foods to cultivated ones, which involves domestication and agriculture.
Right. Broadly, domestication is the process by which something, a plant or animal, comes under human control. More specifically, in agriculture, a domesticated species is one that humans have intensively managed and genetically controlled over time, making it genetically distinct from its wild ancestor or relative. Agriculture, then, is the systematic use of these domesticated species for food and materials.
But here's the big question. Why did people, after millions of years as successful hunter-gatherers, abandon that stable strategy for agriculture, which often requires more labor and is, prone to crop failure?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And we don't fully know the answer. It's complex. We know it began about 10,000 years ago, right around the end of the Pleistocene epoch. Environmental warming and human population expansion likely played major roles, but the exact triggers are still debated.
But once agriculture took hold, its impact was undeniably profound.
It truly was. As people became dependent on domesticated plants and animals, human populations rapidly increased. This led to the growth of villages, then towns, then cities, alongside an increase in political complexity and specialization, eventually developing into what we call early states.
However, farming isn't without its downsides, as you mentioned.
Far from it. I mean, while 8 billion people couldn't possibly survive as hunter-gatherers today, agriculture inevitably impacts natural populations. It massively modifies landscapes and ecosystems, and it overtaxes crucial resources like water and soil. Plus, growing populations crowded together become much more susceptible to things like famine, warfare, and pandemics. We've seen that most recently with COVID-19, of course.
Okay, moving on to the second system you outlined, horticulture. What defines that?
Horticulture is essentially low-intensity agriculture. Think relatively small-scale fields, plots, and gardens. It uses domesticated plants and maybe some small animals like pigs and chickens, with the labor done primarily by people, mostly for personal or family consumption rather than large surpluses for trade.
So it supports smaller populations compared to intensive agriculture.
Generally, yes, it tends to support relatively small and dispersed populations, and it's often associated with tribal political systems. Horticulturalists still hunt and gather, but it's not their primary food source anymore. It's widely practiced, often in forest settings, and it can be destructive if not managed sustainably over the long term.
What kind of gardening methods do horticulturalists use? Is it just small plots?
They use a variety of techniques, actually, including small gardens near homes, raised fields, chenampas, which are these really ingenious raised fields constructed in marshes and terraced fields on hillsides. Many of these can be highly productive. A common method, especially in forested areas, is using slash-and-burn fields. You can visualize this from figure 9.2 in the text. A small area of forest, maybe 3 to 4 acres, where vegetation is cut down, left to dry, and then burned. Crops are then planted in the nutrient-rich, ashy soil. But these fields can only be used for a few years before the soil quality declines and a new one has to be made, which requires a large amount of available land if you're just abandoning them.
But there's a more planned, sustainable version of that,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Yes, exactly. The Swidden system. This is a planned and organized horticultural method that uses slash-and-burn fields but in rotation over many years. Fields are used, then deliberately left fallow to recover their fertility and then reused later. This requires less land overall than just abandoning fields, but it's more susceptible to failure if fields are reused before they've fully recovered. Needs careful management.
The Hopi people offer a compelling case study of horticulture, right? Spotlight 9.4 goes into detail.
They really do. The Hopis are a sedentary horticultural society in northeastern Arizona, and they're renowned for successfully maintaining their traditional way of life for thousands of years. Their philosophy, Hopivatsquani, or the Hopi Way, emphasizes the deep intertwining of humans and nature. They live within Hopatutsqua, their traditional territory. If you look at figure 9.3, you can see their location. It covers 3 distinct ecozones: desert, grassland, and higher elevations with pinyon and juniper trees. They experience 4 distinct seasons, get abundant sunshine, and have about a 130-day growing season, which is perfect for corn.
And their social organization is quite complex, tied into this system.
Very much so. Traditionally, each town was independent, but recognized a collective association, bound by a shared ceremonial system and kinship ties. Today, they also have a formal tribal government. Their social structure is intimately linked to their ceremonial system. The basic unit is an extended family living in a household, usually led by a senior female. These form matrilineages, which are organized into matrilineal clans. And these clans are then members of one of 2 larger groups called moieties. It's quite intricate.
And their farming system sounds incredibly adaptive, especially for that environment.
It truly is remarkable. They farm primarily, supplemented by hunting and gathering, using small fields scattered wherever conditions allow. Most of the labor is done by hand. They cultivate an amazing 24 varieties of corn, each one adapted to specific environmental conditions like soil type and water requirements. This allows them to grow crops successfully where others might fail.
Wow.
This crop diversity is absolutely crucial, and they actively work to preserve these indigenous varieties. They also grow beans, squash, and various fruits.
How on earth do they manage water in such a dry region? That seems key.
It is key. They maintain permanent fields near reliable water sources like natural reservoirs, streams, and springs. They plant crops in the moist soil near these sources or along the edges where floods might occur. They also construct these ingenious rock dams to catch runoff from thunderstorms, instantly creating small, wet, fertile fields. And even in sand dunes, dunes actually retain rainwater quite well below the surface, so they plant a special type of corn really deep, maybe 10 to 15 inches down, so the sand acts as a mulch, holding moisture for the specially adapted deep roots. They even build windbreaks to stabilize the dunes. You can picture it, maybe like in figure 9.4, a traditional Hopi cornfield, maybe with a scarecrow, all diligently tended by hand.
Do they integrate livestock or hunting much?
They have some sheep, goats, and cattle, generally fewer than their Navajo neighbors, and these are often owned by men. Horses and burros are vital for transport. Historically, hunting antelope was significant, but as livestock started displacing wild game, rabbits became the most important hunted animal. They also capture eagles, but for ceremonial purposes, not food. And they gather a wide variety of wild plants for food, medicine, and other uses. They even mine coal locally and trade with other groups. It's a mixed strategy.
And their religion is absolutely central to their subsistence, isn't it?
Absolutely. A major focus of their complex ceremonial cycle is world renewal, agricultural fertility, and crucially, rain. These ceremonies are administered by the clans and various secret societies. Katinas, who are seen as spiritual messengers and mediators between humans and the gods, are integral to this. The belief is deeply held that a failure to properly conduct these ceremonial duties could bring disaster like drought for everyone.
Okay, let's move to the third system you outlined.
Yeah.
Pastoralism. What's the focus here?
Pastoralism centers on animal husbandry. That means the herding, breeding, consumption, and use of various domesticated animals, typically large herd animals like sheep, cattle, goats, camels, etc. Many pastoralist societies are mobile, often referred to as nomads, though that term can be a bit simplistic. Plant cultivation is usually less emphasized, though some horticulture or trade for plant foods might occur. Hunting and gathering often remains a minor, but sometimes important pursuit.
Can pastoralism support large or complex societies?
Yes, it certainly can. It can support relatively large populations with complex political systems, usually organized as tribes, but occasionally even chiefdoms. The Mongols are a famous example, a pastoralist society that developed a state-level political system and created the largest contiguous land empire ever known. So yes, definitely capable of complexity.
What animals are central to pastoralists? Is it just cattle?
No, it varies depending on the environment. They focus on a few key animals suited to their region: cattle, horses, sheep, camels, goats, yaks, llamas, reindeer. They often move their animals seasonally, following a seasonal round similar in concept to foragers, but focused on finding fresh pastures and water for their herds. This requires immense knowledge of the landscape, weather patterns, and their animals' needs.
And they use the animals for so much more than just meat, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's key. Products include food like meat, milk, and sometimes blood, but also other essential goods like hair and wool, which can be taken from live animals, and manure. Manure is incredibly useful. It can be dried and used as fuel, mixed with mud for plaster, or used as fertilizer if they do any farming. It's a truly symbiotic relationship. The animals provide products and labor, and in return, humans provide food, protection, and ensure their reproduction. Just think globally, there are an estimated 1.3 billion cows alone. Pastoralism is a major global subsistence strategy.
Spotlight 9.5 gives us a deep dive into the Maasai, described as an excellent example of milch pastoralism. What does that mean?
The Maasai, who live in the arid plains of southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, you can see the area in Figure 9.5 practice milch pastoralism. This means they primarily rely on using animal products like milk and blood without killing the animal. This maximizes the long-term food value they get from each animal. Milk is obtained daily, and about a quart of blood can be safely taken from a healthy cow each month without harming it. They often mix the milk and blood together for a highly nutritious food, which might seem, well, off-putting to many Westerners, but it's incredibly efficient. Eventually, of course, the cows die naturally, and then their meat, bone, and hides are fully utilized. Nothing is wasted.
What role do cattle play in Maasai society beyond just food?
Cattle are quite literally the basis of life. They represent food, materials, wealth, money. They're used to legitimize marriages through bride price, and they solidify crucial social relationships. A man's status and wealth are largely determined by the number of cattle he owns and his access to grazing rights. In the past, Maasai warriors were famous for protecting their cattle from rustlers and, yes, raiding other groups for cattle too.
So what does a Maasai village typically look like? Figure 9.6 gives a visual.
Right. Picture a small village, often circular, where related families live. It's enclosed by a strong perimeter fence made of thorn bushes to protect against predators like lions. Inside, there are small houses, typically made of bent poles, grass, and plastered with cow dung. These line the inside of the fence. The central open area is reserved for the cattle at night, keeping them safe. Young men might also make smaller temporary camps when they're out herding the cattle farther afield.
Are they solely pastoralists, or do they mix strategies?
Not entirely solely pastoralists. They do practice some horticulture, maintaining small gardens near their settlements. They also collect various wild plants for food and medicine. However, culturally, they generally frown upon consuming wild animals. They prefer to trade their animal products like milk or hides for grain with neighboring farming groups.
And what are the major challenges facing the Maasai today? It sounds like their traditional lifestyle is under pressure.
It absolutely is. The governments of both Kenya and Tanzania have pressured them for decades to settle down, become sedentary farmers. This has led to the loss of about 75% of their traditional grazing lands. These lands have been converted into things like livestock developmental villages, private farms, and national wildlife preserves. Paradoxically, excluding cattle entirely from these new preserves often led to undesirable brush taking over the grasslands, which actually caused the wild game populations to decline and leave. Now, there's a slow recognition of this, and the Maasai are gradually being allowed back onto some lands to reintroduce cattle and resume traditional land management practices, with the hope of restoring the ecosystem and bringing back the wild game. It really raises an important question, doesn't it? How do traditional ecological knowledge systems, developed over centuries, compare to modern conservation approaches? And what can we learn from integrating them?
A very important question indeed. Finally, let's explore the fourth major system: intensive agriculture.
Right. Intensive agriculture is characterized by large-scale, complex systems of farming and pastoralism. It usually involves supplemental labor beyond just humans think draft animals like oxen or machines like tractors. It often relies on irrigation, and its goal is typically to produce surpluses, not just for subsistence, but for trade or storage. It really represents a fundamental shift in the human-environment relationship. It's often driven by a worldview that places humans somehow above nature, believing nature must be controlled or conquered, a perspective that, as we're seeing, can be flawed and potentially catastrophic in the long run.
This system has dramatically increased productivity, though.
Yes, undeniably. The use of domesticated animals and machines to supplement human labor, combined with techniques like irrigation, allows farmers to cultivate much larger areas and colonize new lands, often displacing hunter-gatherers or horticulturalists in the process. However, it typically focuses on a very narrow range of domesticated species, primarily staple grains like wheat, rice, and corn. This increases overall productivity, but also increases risk, as a failure of that single main crop due to disease or weather can lead to widespread famine. Still, even within intensive agriculture, elements of hunting and gathering, horticulture, and pastoralism often remain part of the overall societal subsistence strategy.
And the consequences for society are enormous.
Absolutely. The increased productivity fuels massive population growth. It leads to greater socio-political complexity, the nucleation of settlements into towns and cities, and eventually the development of early-state societies. While the cause and effect isn't always a simple straight line, the general trend is pretty clear. More food allows for more people, which necessitates and enables more complex social and political organization.
Spotlight 9.6 offers two fascinating ancient case studies of intensive agriculture, the Maya and the Egyptians. Let's start with the Maya.
Okay, the ancient Maya. For decades, archaeologists sort of pictured them as having a state society, but with maybe just ceremonial centers and a largely dispersed population living in small hamlets. But relatively recent discoveries, especially using technologies like LiDAR and GIS, which can see through the jungle canopy, have completely changed that picture. They revealed that the Maya had large, complex cities with dense urban populations and many, many more cities than anyone had previously imagined. A truly urban civilization in the rainforest.
So how did the Maya support such large populations in a challenging rainforest environment, especially without machines or draft animals like oxen?
That's the amazing part. The answer lies in their incredibly detailed knowledge of their environment and their use of a highly diverse array of sophisticated farming methods tailored to local conditions. They famously used chinampas. These are complex, raised fields constructed in swampy areas. Imagine creating a sort of waffle-like pattern of canals and raised planting beds. Soil dredged from the canals was used to build up the beds and maintain fertility, and the canals themselves could even support fish and turtles, adding more food. The famous floating gardens of Xochimilco near Mexico City, which you can see depicted in Figure 9.7, are surviving remnants of such a system built later by the Mexica or Aztecs, but based on the same principles.
And they use more than just chinampas, right?
Oh, yes. Beyond chinampas, in swamps, they built other kinds of raised fields in non-swampy areas. They constructed stone-walled terraced gardens on hillsides to prevent erosion and create flat planting surfaces. They had small, intensively cultivated home gardens with maybe over 100 different plant types providing food, medicine, and materials. They also practiced the Swidden system of rotational slash and burn in some areas and simpler slash and burn fields as well. Crucially, they actively managed the forest regrowth in fallowed areas to encourage useful trees. All these different methods, used intensively and adapted to wherever local conditions allowed, created an incredibly productive and remarkably sustainable agricultural system that supported large populations for centuries. They modified the rainforest, yes, but they didn't destroy it. It's a fantastic example of adaptive management and now collaborative research revealing it.
Truly impressive. Now let's turn to the ancient Egyptian system along the Nile River.
Right. For millennia, the Nile River's predictable annual flood was the key. Every year, it deposited a rich layer of fertile alluvial silt across the floodplain. This natural fertilization enabled highly productive agriculture, especially after Near Eastern crops like wheat and barley were introduced around 6,000 years ago. This reliable bounty fueled the development of pharaonic Egypt.
So farmers lived right there in the fertile valley.
Mostly they had their fields in the valley, but their actual villages were often located safely up on the desert edge above the flood level. During the flood season, when the valley was inundated, farmers couldn't work their fields. So many did wage labor for the pharaoh, working on massive state projects like building temples and pyramids. Then, when the waters receded, leaving that fresh layer of silt, they returned to plant their crops, often using plows pulled by oxen. They also supplemented their diets heavily with fish caught in the river and birds nesting in the marshes. This remarkably stable and sustainable system worked incredibly well for about 6,000 years.
But then came the Aswan High Dam in modern times. That changed everything.
It really did. In the 1950s, the Egyptian government built the Aswan High Dam. The main goals were to stop the annual floods completely, control the river's water levels for year-round irrigation, and allow for multi-cropping getting more than one harvest per year. But the unintended consequences have been severe. The lack of that annual silt deposition means farmers now have to rely heavily on expensive chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which pollute the river and the groundwater. Salt accumulation in the soil from constant irrigation without the flushing effect of the flood has become a major problem, reducing fertility. Towns and cities have encroached onto former farmland. Fishing yields in the river and the delta have declined drastically. The Nile's mouth into the Mediterranean has become something of a biological dead zone. The river water itself, once drinkable, is often not safe now. And Lake Nasser, the huge reservoir created by the dam, will eventually fill up with the silt that used to fertilize the valley. It's simply not sustainable in the long run. The ancient Egyptians, in many ways, truly had it right for their time and place.
That brings us right up to the present day, and industrialized agriculture, often called the corporate food system. This is the system many societies rely on now, developed largely after World War II.
Exactly. The system is characterized by being highly specialized. Farming happens on a massive, often monoculture scale, focusing on just a few staple crops like corn, wheat, and rice. The small family farm has largely been replaced by immense corporate farming operations.
And it relies on a vast infrastructure, doesn't it? It's not just about the farm itself.
Immensely so. It's critically dependent on machines, tractors, combines, etc., which run on fossil fuels. It relies on huge inputs of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, all requiring a massive industrial complex to produce them. It also necessitates extensive landscape modifications, like damming rivers for irrigation on an even larger scale, or draining marshes and wetlands, often causing significant harm to natural ecosystems. While it's incredibly productive in terms of sheer volume per unit of labor in the short term, it's also highly polluting, very expensive in terms of inputs, and ultimately unsustainable.
Can you elaborate on the core reasons for its unsustainability? Why can't this continue indefinitely?
Well, there are many interconnected reasons. First, prime farmland is rapidly being lost globally. It's lost to desertification, urbanization, cities sprawling onto farmland, soil erosion, and pollution. For instance, the text mentions about a third of California's prime farmland has been lost in just the last 200 years or so. Second, this kind of intensive farming rapidly depletes soil fertility. This leads to that massive reliance on chemical fertilizers, which then run off into waterways, polluting groundwater and creating huge dead zones in coastal ocean areas where the excess nutrients cause algal blooms that deplete oxygen. Third, soil erosion itself is a massive global problem exacerbated by industrial practices. It's affecting places like the Midwestern US, large parts of China, and even the Nile Valley now without the silt replenishment. Fourth, those pesticides and herbicides designed to kill specific pests or weeds inevitably find their way into other organisms, including beneficial insects, wildlife, and even humans with unknown long-term health effects. They're even implicated in killing crucial pollinators like bees, which we rely on for many crops. Remember the ducks and the rice paddies. A much more integrated approach. Fifth, water. Fresh water is becoming increasingly scarce in many agricultural regions. Industrial agriculture uses vast amounts, often inefficiently through methods like flood irrigation, which can also ruin soil fertility over time due to salt buildup, salinization. Plus, growing cities are competing intensely with farms for limited water resources.
And the heavy reliance on machines and the way animals are raised industrially also have major environmental and ethical costs, right?
Absolutely. The vast majority of labor is mechanized, requiring not only the machines themselves, but also the costly infrastructure to build and maintain them, and massive amounts of fossil fuels to run them. This contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions all along the chain, from fertilizer production to running tractors to transporting food long distances. And for the few crops still harvested by hand, like maybe certain fruits or vegetables, the text mentions radishes or coffee, the system often relies on seasonal laborers who are frequently migrants, sometimes undocumented, and often face poor wages and working conditions.
What about how animals are raised in this system?
The system has industrialized animal production too, for meat, milk, eggs, and leather. Most beef cattle, for example, are raised for much of their lives in huge, crowded feedlots you can imagine. Figure 9.8, just vast pens where they are confined and fed primarily grains, often corn, instead of grazing. Dairy cattle are also largely confined in industrial dairies. Chickens are housed by the tens or hundreds of thousands in enormous facilities. These crowded conditions are unfortunately ideal havens for diseases like bird flu, which can then necessitate mass culls of millions of birds.
So pulling this all together, what does this assessment mean for the future of feeding ourselves?
Well, the conclusion drawn in the text is pretty stark. Traditional farming systems, like those developed over millennia in places like China and India, were able to sustain large populations for thousands of years, often within ecological limits. Industrialized agriculture, with all these inherent issues we've just discussed, the soil depletion, the water use, the pollution, the fossil fuel dependence, the biodiversity loss, it simply cannot be sustained indefinitely in its current form. It will eventually face profound challenges and likely require significant transformation, if not risk outright failure in some regions.
Wow. What a journey through the human relationship with food and the incredibly diverse systems we've built around it. From the fundamental nutrients that power our bodies to the amazing variety of cuisines that define our cultures, and tracing the evolution of subsistence systems, hunting and gathering, horticulture, pastoralism, and intensive agriculture, we really see this constant interplay between human innovation, the environment we live in, and the societal impacts of our choices.
It's truly a story of incredible human adaptation and ingenuity, but also one of profound consequences, particularly as we grapple with the unsustainable trajectory of industrialized agriculture today. It really forces us to reflect on how our choices, what we eat, how our food is produced, will inevitably shape the diets, the landscapes, and the lives of generations to come.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Maybe next time you sit down to eat, just take a moment to consider the long, complex history behind every single bite. From those ancient fires that first cooked new kinds of foods, to the vast global exchanges that brought potatoes to Ireland and tomatoes to Italy, and from the intricate, sustainable gardens of the Hopi to the vast mechanized fields of today. Food is truly, deeply at the core of human society. It has shaped our past, it defines our present, and it will undoubtedly shape our future.
And perhaps this leaves us with an important question to ponder. How might we integrate the wisdom, the ecological knowledge embedded in traditional, sustainable subsistence systems with the best of modern science and technology to forge a more resilient, more equitable, and truly sustainable food future for everyone on the planet?
We certainly hope this deep dive has given you plenty to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn with us from the Last Minute Lecture team.